Have you ever given your all to a job, only to be tossed aside like yesterday's trash? That's what happened to me. 10 years of my life dedicated to building someone else's dream. 10 years of missed family dinners, working weekends, and putting the company before my own needs. And what did I get in return? A pink slip and 30 minutes to clear out my desk. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. But there's one crucial detail my boss didn't know when he decided to fire me that Friday afternoon with that smug look on his face. I wasn't just his loyal employee, I was also his landlord. And sometimes, life has a way of serving the perfect revenge when you least expect it. This is the story of how I went from being fired to becoming the master of my own destiny, and how my former boss learned that karma comes back around when you least expect it. My name is Daniel Parker, and until 3 months ago, I was the senior marketing director at Vertex Technologies, a mid-sized software company based in Philadelphia. I started with Vertex when it was just a fledgling startup operating out of a converted warehouse in the industrial district. Back then, there were only 8 of us, including the founder and CEO, Richard Manning. Richard was charismatic and ambitious. When I first met him, he painted visions of building something revolutionary, disrupting markets and changing the tech landscape forever. His enthusiasm was infectious, and I bought into his dream completely. I was 28 then, eager to make my mark on the world, and Vertex seemed like the perfect vehicle. In those early days, we all wore multiple hats. I wasn't just handling marketing. I was answering customer service calls, pitching to investors, and even making coffee runs. We worked 16-hour days, slept on office couches, and celebrated every small victory like we'd won the lottery. There was a camaraderie among us that made the grueling schedule bearable, even enjoyable. We were in the trenches together, fighting for the same cause. The first 3 years were the hardest. We scraped by on minimal funding, constantly pivoting our product to find the right market fit. I remember one particularly grim winter when Richard gathered us all in the conference room. His face was gaunt from lack of sleep, and his normally immaculate suit looked rumpled. "I'm not going to sugarcoat this," he said, his voice hoarse. "We have enough runway for 2 more months. If we don't land the Meridian contract, we're done." That night, I didn't go home. I stayed at the office, meticulously crafting a marketing presentation that would showcase our software in a way Meridian couldn't refuse. I researched their pain points, customized our solution to address their specific needs, and practiced my pitch until I could recite it in my sleep. When presentation day came, Richard and I tag-teamed the pitch. I laid the groundwork with my marketing presentation, and Richard closed with his undeniable charm. We left the meeting cautiously optimistic, and 3 days later, we received the news. Meridian had signed a 2-year contract worth $1.8 million. That deal saved Vertex, and Richard was effusive in his gratitude. "Daniel," he said, clapping me on the shoulder as we celebrated with cheap champagne and plastic cups, "I won't forget what you did here. We're in this together, for the long haul." I believed him. Why wouldn't I? We had fought and won side by side. In my mind, we weren't just colleagues. We were brothers in arms. The Meridian deal was the turning point. Suddenly, we had credibility in the market. Other clients followed, and Vertex began to grow. We moved from our dingy warehouse to a proper office space in a renovated historic building downtown. We hired more staff, expanded our product line, and started making real money. By year 5, Vertex had grown to 50 employees, and I had built a marketing team of 10 talented professionals. Our company culture was still strong. Everyone knew everyone. Richard still remembered birthdays, and we maintained the scrappy, innovative spirit that had carried us through those early days. It was around this time that an unexpected opportunity fell into my lap. My uncle Theodore passed away, leaving me a substantial inheritance. Among his assets was a commercial building in the heart of Philadelphia's business district. It was a beautiful 6-story structure with historical significance, built in the 1920s but impeccably maintained and updated with modern amenities. I consulted with financial advisors who unanimously agreed commercial real estate in that location was a solid investment. The building already had tenants on 5 floors with stable leases and good rental income. The second floor, however, was vacant. Around the same time, Richard mentioned that our current office lease was expiring, and he was considering a move to accommodate our growing team. A light bulb went off in my head. What if Vertex moved into my building? I suggested it during a casual lunch. Richard raised an eyebrow. Your building? I explained about my inheritance, and Richard's eyes lit up with interest as I described the space. The location was perfect, central, prestigious, with amenities that would help us attract top talent. The vacant floor offered 10,000 square feet, ideal for our current needs with room to expand. We could customize it exactly how we want, I said, warming to the idea. And I'd give Vertex favorable lease terms, of course. Richard was sold on the idea immediately. We shook hands across the table, and just like that, Vertex became the tenant of the second floor of the Parker Building, named in honor of my uncle. I decided not to make my ownership widely known among my colleagues. Not because I was hiding anything, but because I didn't want it to change the dynamics of my relationships at work. Only Richard, our CFO Martha Stevens, and the HR director knew I was the building's owner. To everyone else, I was just Daniel, the marketing director. The arrangement worked beautifully for years. Vertex continued to grow, eventually expanding to the third floor as well. I took pride in being both a key player in the company's success and the provider of its physical home. My dual investment, of time in Vertex and money in the building, seemed like the perfect synergy. By year 8, Vertex had grown to over 200 employees and was generating annual revenue of $45 million. We had become a respected name in our industry, and Richard had achieved the success he'd always envisioned. I was proud of what we'd built together, but something had changed in Richard. The hungry, passionate entrepreneur who had inspired me a decade ago had been replaced by someone more corporate, more concerned with appearances and status than innovation and team spirit. He moved in different circles now: country club memberships, yacht parties with other CEOs, exclusive retreats in exotic locations. I noticed the shift gradually. First, it was small things. Richard stopped joining our Friday happy hours. He canceled our one-on-one meetings with increasing frequency. My ideas, once valued and implemented, were now often dismissed without real consideration. Martha, the CFO who had been with us almost from the beginning, noticed it too. He's different since the Robinson acquisition, she confided in me one evening as we worked late. It's like he's forgotten where he came from. The Robinson acquisition had been a significant milestone for Vertex, our first major purchase of a competitor. It had doubled our market share overnight and brought in new board members, including Jason Wells, a cutthroat businessman known for his aggressive cost-cutting strategies. Jason and Richard had become thick as thieves, often closeted in Richard's office for hours. Rumors began circulating about a corporate restructuring aimed at streamlining operations and increasing profitability before a potential IPO. Still, I didn't worry about my position. I had been there from the start. I had saved the company with the Meridian deal. I was not just an employee, I was part of Vertex's foundation. Plus, our marketing department consistently delivered results above industry standards. Then came Black Friday, as we later called it. It started like any other day. I arrived at 7:30 a.m., grabbed my coffee from the break room, and settled in to review our quarterly marketing analytics. At 9:15, I received a calendar invitation from Richard for a 10 a.m. meeting. The subject simply read, Discussion. I thought nothing of it. Richard and I still had occasional meetings, though they had become less frequent and more formal over the years. At 10 sharp, I knocked on Richard's office door and entered to find not just Richard, but also Jason Wells and Vanessa Cooper, our new HR director who had replaced our original HR lead 6 months prior. "Daniel, have a seat," Richard said, not making eye contact. His voice was different, cold, detached. I sat, a knot forming in my stomach as I registered the grim expressions around the room. "We're making some organizational changes," Richard began, his fingers steepled in front of him. "As part of our preparation for the IPO, we're streamlining the executive team and restructuring several departments." I nodded slowly, still not fully comprehending where this was heading. "We've decided to eliminate your position," Richard continued, his voice clinical. "We're bringing in someone with more experience in digital-first strategies and IPO preparation." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Eliminate my position? Richard, I built the marketing department from nothing. Our metrics are the best they've ever been." "It's not about your performance, Daniel," Vanessa interjected smoothly. "It's about the direction the company needs to move in now." "And what direction is that?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. "A more innovative one," Jason Wells said with a thin smile. "Fresh perspectives, cutting-edge approaches." I turned to Richard, ignoring the others. 10 years, Richard. I've given this company 10 years of my life. I was there when we couldn't make payroll. I landed Meridian when we were weeks away from shutting down. Does none of that matter? A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. A flicker of something, guilt perhaps, crossed Richard's face, before it hardened again. "Business isn't about the past, Daniel. It's about the future. We appreciate your contributions, but we need to move on." Vanessa slid a folder across the table. "This contains your severance package, 2 months' salary, continuation of benefits for 30 days, and an NDA that we'll need you to sign." 2 months? I echoed incredulously. "After 10 years? It's generous, given the circumstances," Jason said dismissively. "What circumstances?" I demanded. Richard finally met my eyes. "We're aware that you've been talking to Meridian about a potential position with them." My mouth fell open in shock. "What? That's absolutely false." "We have emails, Daniel," Vanessa said softly, though her eyes remained cold. "Please don't make this more difficult than it needs to be." I was speechless. The accusation was completely fabricated. Yes, I still maintained a good relationship with Meridian's marketing director. We sometimes exchanged industry insights and occasionally met for lunch, but I had never, not once, discussed working for them. "Richard," I said, my voice low and intense, "you know me better than this. Whatever emails you think you have, they're either fake or misinterpreted. I have been loyal to Vertex from day one." "I'd like to believe that," Richard replied, but his tone suggested he'd already made up his mind. "But the evidence is compelling. In light of this breach of trust, we're asking you to clear out your desk immediately. Ryan from security will assist you." Ryan, a security guard I'd greeted cheerfully every morning for years, was suddenly standing in the doorway, looking uncomfortable, but resolute. "You have 30 minutes, Richard said, standing to indicate the meeting was over. "Vanessa will. Collect your keycard and company devices before you leave." In a daze, I walked back to my office with Ryan trailing behind me. News traveled fast. My team watched with shocked expressions as I mechanically packed my personal items into a cardboard box. Emily, my deputy who had been with me for 7 years, tried to speak to me, but Ryan politely but firmly prevented any extended conversations. 30 minutes later, I stood in the lobby, clutching my sad little box of desk plants, family photos, and a Marketing Director of the Year award the team had given me 2 Christmases ago. Vanessa efficiently collected my laptop, phone, and keycard. "Is there anything else?" she asked perfunctorily. I looked at her, then passed her to the elegant lobby of the building, my building, with its marble floors and Art Deco fixtures that I had carefully preserved during renovation. A strange calm settled over me as the shock began to give way to a different emotion. "Actually, there is one thing," I said, setting down my box and reaching for my personal phone. I pulled up a contact and dialed. "Hello, James? It's Daniel Parker. Yes, the building owner." I paused, aware that Vanessa's expression had shifted from professional detachment to confusion. "I need to speak with you about the Vertex Technologies lease. Yes, it's urgent. Could you come to the building now?" "Excellent." I ended the call and picked up my box again, offering Vanessa a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "James Turner, my property manager. I believe he should speak with Richard immediately regarding some lease considerations." Vanessa blinked rapidly, clearly trying to process this new information. "You're the owner of this building?" "Parker Building," I said, gesturing to the bronze plaque in the lobby that bore my family name. Named after my uncle Theodore Parker, who left it to me 6 years ago. "Did Richard never mention that little detail when he asked you to escort me out?" The color drained from Vanessa's face. She reached for her phone, presumably to call Richard, but I was already walking toward the exit. "I wouldn't worry about calling Richard just yet," I said over my shoulder. "James will be having a very interesting conversation with him shortly. I believe there's a clause in our lease agreement about maintaining harmonious business relationships. Firing the landlord without, 'cause might just constitute a breach." I pushed through the revolving door into the bright spring sunshine, feeling the weight of a decade of loyalty lifting from my shoulders with each step away from the building. For the first time in years, I felt something that had become foreign. To me, freedom. Behind me, I heard the frantic click of Vanessa's heels as she rushed back toward the elevators, no doubt racing to deliver the news to Richard that his hasty decision had far more significant consequences than he'd anticipated. Placed my box in the trunk of my car and slid into the driver's seat, taking a moment to breathe deeply. 10 years of my life had just ended in 30 humiliating minutes. The betrayal stung deeply, especially the fabricated accusation about Meridian. But as I started the engine, a small, unexpected smile played at the corners of my mouth. Richard. Manning had made a critical error in judgment today, one that would cost him far more than he could imagine. I pulled out my phone again and dialed another number. "Liam? It's Daniel. Remember that business idea we discussed last year? I think I'm finally ready to move forward with it, and I might just have the perfect office space in mind." I arrived home that afternoon in a strange state of mind. The shock was still there, but it was now mixed with something else, a sense of opportunity, of doors opening rather than closing. I sat on my balcony overlooking the Philadelphia skyline, nursing a glass of whiskey as the sun began to set, and considered my options. James Turner, my property manager, had called me shortly after our initial conversation. His meeting with Richard had been, in his words, educational for all parties involved. "When I explained who you were, Mr. Manning turned white as a sheet," James had reported with poorly concealed amusement. "The other gentleman, Mr. Wells, I believe, started cursing rather colorfully." "And what was the outcome?" I had asked. I reminded them of Clause 16.3 in the lease agreement, which stipulates that the tenant will maintain a professional and harmonious working relationship with all parties associated with the property, including the owner or the owner's representatives. I smiled, remembering the clause I had insisted on when drafting the lease with Richard. At the time, it had seemed like a standard legal protection. Now it was my ace in the hole. I also pointed out, James continued, that terminating a key employee who happens to be the building owner under false pretenses could be construed as a violation of that clause, potentially triggering the penalty provisions in Section 22. Section 22 was ruthless, immediately doubling the rent and requiring a penalty payment equal to 6 months lease value. For a company preparing for an IPO, Such an unexpected financial hit would raise serious questions from potential investors. How did they respond? I had asked. Mr. Manning asked for 48 hours to rectify the situation. I agreed, as a professional courtesy. Now, as I watched the city lights begin to twinkle against the darkening sky, my phone buzzed with incoming calls and messages, colleagues expressing shock and outrage, industry contacts offering support, even competitors, floating job opportunities. I ignored them all for now. I needed this time to think clearly. The truth was, despite my decade at Vertex, I had grown increasingly dissatisfied over the past 2 years. Richard's transformation from visionary leader to corporate figurehead had changed the company culture I had once loved. The camaraderie had been replaced by politics, the innovation by risk aversion, the shared mission by profit margins. So why was I still there? Loyalty, partly. Comfort, mostly. I had become so identified with Vertex that I couldn't imagine myself elsewhere. Richard's betrayal had forced me out of that comfort zone, and now that the initial shock was wearing off, I realized it might be the best thing that could have happened to me. I opened my laptop and pulled up a business plan I had drafted nearly a year ago but never pursued. It outlined a new kind of marketing consultancy, one that specialized in helping tech startups navigate the treacherous waters from initial funding to market establishment. Everything I had learned building Vertex from the ground up, all the hard-won lessons and strategies, could be packaged into a service that would give other entrepreneurs a fighting chance. I had mentioned the idea to Liam Carter, an old college friend who had gone on to become a successful business coach in San Francisco. He had been enthusiastic, suggesting we partner up, his coaching expertise combined with my marketing and startup experience. But I had hesitated, unwilling to leave the company I had helped build. Now, that barrier was gone. I pulled out my phone and dialed Liam again. "Daniel," Liam answered on the second ring. "I was hoping you'd call. I heard what happened at Vertex. News travels fast in our circles. How are you holding up?" "Better than expected," I replied honestly. "Actually, I'm calling about that partnership we discussed. Still interested?" "Are you kidding? I've been keeping a business plan in my drawer waiting for this call." "But are you sure? This is a big shift, and it's only been a few hours since you left Vertex." "Sometimes you need a push to make the leap you should have made on your own," I said. "But there's more to the story than you've heard. Got time for the full version?" For the next half hour, I filled Liam in on everything: my ownership of the building, the clause in the lease agreement, and Richard's precarious position. By the end, Liam was laughing incredulously. "So let me get this straight," he said when he could finally speak. "They fired the guy who owns their building, accused him of something he didn't do, and now they're scrambling to fix it before you drop the financial hammer on them? Daniel, this is poetic justice at its finest." "It is, isn't it?" I agreed. "But here's where it gets interesting. I'm not sure I want them to fix it. I'm not sure I want to go back even if they beg." "I don't blame you. So what's your play? Here?" I took a deep breath, the plan forming as I spoke. The second and third floors of my building are prime real estate in the business district. Vertex is paying below market rates because I gave them a sweetheart deal as both an employee and the owner. "And now you're neither," Liam noted. "Exactly. I'm thinking it's time for a change of tenants, and I know exactly who the new tenant should be." "Parker and Carter Consulting," Liam said, catching on immediately. "Has a nice ring to it." "I was thinking Launchpad Partners," I countered. "Less about us, more about what we do for clients." "Even better," Liam agreed. "But what? About your contractual obligations to Vertex? Won't evicting them be complicated?" "James is sending over the lease agreement tonight. I'll review the termination clauses, but from what I remember, I have several options. The breach of Clause 16.3 is the clearest path, but there might be others. And Richard? He'll fight back if his IPO is threatened." I considered this. Richard was nothing if not resourceful, and he had significant resources at his disposal. Let him try. I have documented every interaction, every promise, every contribution I've made to Vertex for 10 years. If he wants to make this messier than it needs to be, I'm prepared. That's the Daniel Parker I remember from college, Liam said approvingly. The strategist who never entered a battle he wasn't prepared to win. We talked for another hour, sketching out the framework for our new venture. By the time we hung up, the plan was taking solid shape. Liam would fly to Philadelphia in 3 days. We would formalize our partnership, begin the process of establishing Launchpad partners, and prepare to move into the space currently occupied by Vertex, once I had legally extricated them from the lease. The next morning, I woke to 17 missed calls and 38 text messages. Most were from colleagues at Vertex expressing solidarity or seeking information. 3 were from Vanessa Cooper, each more urgent than the last. 1 was from Martha, the CFO, asking to meet privately. I ignored them all and focused on my new path forward. I spent the morning reviewing the lease agreement James had sent over. As I suspected, Clause 16.3 provided clear grounds for termination with just 30 days' notice, given the circumstances. But there was another clause that caught my attention: Vertex's right of first refusal on lease renewal. The current lease was set to expire in 4 months. Under normal circumstances, Vertex would have the right to match any competing offer and retain the space. But the breach of Clause 16.3 potentially nullified that right, depending on how the language was interpreted. I forwarded the relevant sections to Sophia Lee, a sharp real estate attorney who had helped me manage the building since I inherited it. Her response came within the hour. You have multiple viable options here. The cleanest is to provide notice of breach under 16.3 and demand cure, which in this case would likely mean reinstating your employment under the same or better terms. If they fail to cure within the specified period, 10 business days, you can proceed with lease termination under Section 22. Alternatively, you could simply wait out the remaining 4 months, then deny renewal based on the prior breach. Would you like to discuss strategy in more detail? I replied immediately, setting up a meeting for that afternoon. This was moving faster than I had anticipated, but I wasn't going to slow down. The momentum felt right. At noon, another call came. This one from Richard himself. I let it go to voicemail. His message was strained, clearly uncomfortable. Daniel, we need to talk. There's been a misunderstanding. Please call me back as soon as possible. This is urgent. I deleted the message without responding. 10 years of loyalty had earned me a 30-minute escort out of the building. Richard could wait a day or 2 for my response. My meeting with Sophia was productive. We decided on a 2-pronged approach: formally notify Vertex of the breach with a demand to cure, while simultaneously preparing for the eventual non-renewal of the lease. This gave me leverage in the short term while ensuring a clean break in the longer term. They'll probably offer to reinstate you, Sophia warned. Be prepared for that possibility. Know what you want before you walk into any meeting with them. I already know what I want, I assured her. And it's not my old job back. By the end of the day, the formal notice of breach had been drafted and was ready to be delivered to Vertex. The following morning, I had also contacted a commercial renovation contractor to discuss transforming the space to suit the needs of Launchpad partners once Vertex vacated. That evening, as I was reviewing potential client targets for our new venture, my doorbell rang. I checked the security camera and was surprised to see Martha Stevens, Vertex's CFO, standing in my lobby. I buzzed her up, curious about what had brought her to my home. Martha and I had always had a good professional relationship. She was one of the original team members, having joined Vertex just a few months after me, and had maintained her integrity even as the company culture shifted. Daniel, she said when I opened the door, looking relieved that I had allowed her in. Thank you for seeing me. I wasn't sure you would. You're one of the few people from Vertex I'm willing to talk to right now, I said honestly, ushering her into my living room. Can I get you something to drink? Just water, thanks. I can't stay long. I brought her a glass of water and sat across from her. So I'm guessing Richard sent you? Martha shook her head. He doesn't know I'm here. In fact, he'd probably fire me if he found out. That caught my attention. Then why are you here? She took a deep breath. 2 reasons. First, I wanted to apologize. I knew nothing about their plan to terminate you until after it happened. If I had known, I would have fought it. I appreciate that, I said, and meant it. Second, I thought you should know what's really going on. She leaned forward, lowering, her voice as if we might be overheard. The accusations about Meridian? Complete fabrication. There were no emails. Jason made that up to give them cause. I felt a surge of vindication, but it was tempered by confusion. Why would they go to such lengths? Why not just lay me off if they wanted me gone? Because of the IPO, Martha explained. Laying off a founding team member would raise red flags with investors. But terminating someone for cause, especially something like corporate espionage, that's justifiable and even shows decisive leadership. So they were willing to destroy my reputation to make themselves look good to investors, I said flatly. The betrayal cut even deeper now, knowing how calculated it had been. It gets worse, Martha continued. They've been systematically pushing out the old guard for months. Anyone who remembers the early days, anyone who might question Richard's revisionist history of how Vertex was built. They want a clean narrative for the IPO, Richard the visionary genius who single-handedly built a tech empire. I laughed bitterly. And I suppose the Meridian deal is now his crowning achievement? Martha nodded grimly. In the current version, he closed that deal through sheer force of personality, while you assisted with slides. My hands clenched involuntarily. I had sacrificed countless personal moments for Vertex, missed my grandfather's funeral to save. The Meridian deal put the company ahead of my own health and relationships. And this was how my contribution was being erased. Why are you telling me this, Martha? You're putting yourself at risk. She straightened, a flash of the old Vertex spirit in her eyes. Because it's wrong. Because this isn't the company we built together. And because they're about to find out they made a catastrophic mistake in firing you, and I want to witness the fallout firsthand. You know about the building, I realized. I've always known. I'm the CFO. I sign the rent checks. She smiled slightly. Richard forgot that detail when he was plotting with Jason and Vanessa. And now there's panic. Richard's been locked in his office all day with the legal team. Jason is furious, blaming everyone but himself. Vanessa is updating her resume. Martha's smile widened. The board called an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning. I absorbed this information, turning it over in my mind. What do you think they'll offer? Your job back, at minimum. Probably a promotion, a raise, maybe equity if they're desperate enough. They can't afford a scandal or a financial hit this close to the IPO. I nodded slowly. And what about you, Martha? Where do you stand in all this? She sighed, suddenly looking tired. I've been with Vertex almost as long as you have. I believed in what we were building. But the company it's become? She shook her head. I've been updating my resume, too. An idea formed in my mind. What if there was another option? Not Vertex, but something new. Something that recaptures what we originally set out to build. Martha tilted her head, intrigued. I'm listening. For the next hour, I outlined my plans for Launchpad Partners, explaining how Liam and I envisioned it as a lifeline for promising startups. As I spoke, Martha's expression shifted from skepticism to consideration to excitement. You'd need someone to handle the financial side, she said when I finished. Someone who understands how to structure deals with startups that might not have steady cash flow yet. We would, I agreed, smiling at her clear interest. Know anyone who fits that description? Martha laughed, the first genuine laugh I'd heard from her in months. I might. She's currently employed, but I hear she's considering her options. By the time Martha left, we had a tentative agreement. She would wait until after the board meeting, hear Vertex's plan for damage control, and then make her decision. If she chose to join Launchpad Partners, she would be our third founding partner, with an equal stake in the business. As I closed the door behind her, I felt a surge of excitement that I hadn't experienced in years. The betrayal still stung, but it had catalyzed something unexpected, a return to the passion and purpose that had driven me in those early days at Vertex. My phone buzzed with a text from Richard. Meeting tomorrow, 9 a.m. Please come. We need to make this right. I sent a simple reply. I'll be there. Then I called Liam. Change of plans. I think we might be adding a third partner to Launchpad. And tomorrow morning, I'm going to find out exactly how much my decade of loyalty is worth to Richard Manning. As I hung up, I walked to the window and looked out at the city lights, at the silhouette of the Parker Building standing proud among the Philadelphia skyline. Tomorrow would bring a reckoning, and after that, a new beginning. I arrived at the Vertex Technologies office the next morning, precisely at 8:55 a.m. I wore my best suit, charcoal gray with subtle pinstripes, a power tie, and the platinum cufflinks my grandfather had given me when I graduated college. If this was to be my final meeting at Vertex, I wanted to look every inch the successful businessman I was, not the disgraced employee they had tried to paint me as. The security guard, Ryan, looked deeply uncomfortable when I walked through the front doors. Mr. Parker, I just want to say I'm sorry about what happened. If I'd known... It's not your fault, Ryan, I assured him. You were just doing your job. He nodded gratefully and handed me a visitor badge without asking me to sign in. They're waiting for you in the main boardroom. As I walked through the office toward the executive suite, the energy was palpable. Employees stopped mid-conversation to stare as I passed. Some offered small nods of support or whispered greetings. Others quickly averted their eyes, perhaps afraid of being seen as sympathetic to the man who now held their employer's fate in his hands. Emily Chan, my former deputy, stepped directly into my path. Daniel, she said, her voice low but intense. Whatever they offer you in there, know that the marketing team is behind you 100%. What they did was wrong. Thank you, Emily, I replied, genuinely touched by her loyalty. How's the team holding up? Angry, confused. They brought in some hotshot from a digital agency yesterday afternoon to evaluate our processes. She rolled her eyes. He spent 2 hours explaining basic concepts to a team that's been outperforming industry benchmarks for years. I shook my head, but wasn't surprised. Keep doing the excellent work you've always done. And Emily? Whatever happens next, remember I've got your number. She understood my meaning immediately and nodded with a slight smile before stepping aside. When I reached the boardroom, I paused for a moment, taking a deep breath to center myself. Then I pushed open the heavy wooden door. Inside, a tableau of tense faces greeted me. Richard sat at the head of the table, looking like he hadn't slept. To his right was Jason Wells, his expression a careful mask of neutrality. Vanessa Cooper sat to Richard's left, a folder of documents in front of her. 4 members of the board were present, including Patricia Wilson, the lead investor who had backed Vertex from its early days. Martha sat near the far end, her face giving nothing away. Daniel, Richard said, rising to his feet with a forced smile. Thank you for coming. Please, have a seat. I deliberately chose a chair directly opposite Richard, making sure he would have to look me in the eye throughout the meeting. Before we begin, I said calmly, placing my briefcase on the table. I want to be clear about something. I'm here as a courtesy, and because I'm curious to hear what you have to say. But make no mistake, I am not the same person who was escorted out of this building 2 days ago. That person no longer exists. Richard's smile faltered. Daniel, about what happened? I'm not interested in apologies, Richard, I interrupted. I'm interested in facts. So let's start with this one. You terminated my employment based on accusations of corporate espionage that you knew were false. You deliberately fabricated evidence to justify firing me for cause. I turned to the board members. Did all of you know that part? Or was that detail omitted from the emergency briefing? Patricia Wilson's eyes narrowed as she looked sharply at Richard. What is he talking about, Richard? Richard cleared his throat. There was a miscommunication regarding the circumstances of Daniel's departure. That's part of what we need to rectify today. A miscommunication? I repeated incredulously. Is that what we're calling defamation these days? Daniel, Jason cut in smoothly. We all regret how things transpired. Mistakes were made, obviously, but we're here to make it right. I'm sure you are, I replied. Now that you know I own the building you're sitting in, and that I have grounds to terminate your lease and potentially derail your IPO, making it right suddenly seems important to you. The tension in the room ratcheted up several notches. Patricia looked between Richard and me, clearly trying to assess the situation. Perhaps, she said carefully, we should hear what Richard and the executive team are proposing to resolve this unfortunate situation. Richard nodded gratefully. Yes, thank you, Patricia. He turned to Vanessa, who slid a document across the table to me. We want to offer you reinstatement, effective immediately, Richard said as I picked up the papers. With a promotion to Chief Marketing Officer, a seat on the executive leadership team, and an increase in compensation of 30%. Additionally, we're prepared to grant you stock options equal to 2% of the company, which would become fully vested upon the IPO. I scanned the document, noting the impressive compensation package and the carefully worded section that effectively erased the termination from my employment record. It was, by any objective measure, an extraordinarily generous offer. 2 years. Ago, I would have been ecstatic to receive it, but that was before I knew what Richard and his new inner circle were truly capable of. This is quite an about-face, I observed, setting the document down. 2 days ago, I was a disloyal employee sneaking around behind your back. Today, I'm executive leadership material. What changed, Richard? My understanding of your value to the company, he replied without missing a beat. And my recognition that recent changes in our culture may have obscured that value temporarily. I almost had to admire his ability to spin the situation. And the accusations about Meridian? The alleged emails? Richard had the decency to look uncomfortable. A regrettable error in judgment based on incomplete information. An error that just happened to give you cause to fire me without raising. Red flags with investors, I pressed. Patricia's eyebrows shot up. Richard, is this true? Were the reasons for Daniel's termination fabricated? Before Richard could answer, I pulled a document from my briefcase. I have here a formal notice of breach of Clause 16.3 of the lease agreement between Vertex Technologies and Parker Properties. This clause requires the tenant to maintain a professional and harmonious working relationship with all parties associated with the property. I slid the document toward Richard. By terminating my employment under false pretenses, you violated this clause. According to Section 22 of our agreement, this violation triggers an immediate doubling of your lease obligation and a penalty payment equal to 6 months' lease value. Additionally, it nullifies your right of first refusal on lease renewal. The color drained from Richard's face as the legal implications sank in. Jason cursed under his breath, and Vanessa began frantically flipping through her own documents, presumably looking for a loophole. This is extortion, Jason said sharply. No. Mr. Wells, this is contract law, I countered. The terms were clear from the beginning. Richard signed this agreement willingly, fully aware that I was the building owner. Patricia Wilson looked truly alarmed now. Richard, what is the financial impact if this penalty is enforced? Martha spoke up for the first time. Approximately $3.8 million, including the doubled rent for the remainder of the lease term and the penalty payment. Additionally, we would have 4 months to find and renovate suitable alternative office space for 250 employees, which would conservatively cost another $2 million and severely disrupt operations during the pre-IPO period. A deadly silence fell over the room as the board members exchanged horrified glances. But of course, I said into the silence, there's an alternative. I tapped the offer document Richard had presented. I could accept this generous package, return to Vertex, and we could all pretend the events of the past few days never happened. Richard leaned forward eagerly. Yes, exactly. Water under the bridge. We can move forward together, stronger than before. I smiled thinly. It's an appealing offer, Richard. It really is. But there's just one problem. I pushed the document back toward him. I don't trust you anymore, and no amount of money or stock options can change that. The hope that had begun to dawn on Richard's face crumpled. Daniel, be reasonable. This is your company too. You helped build it from nothing. Are you really willing to damage it over a personal grudge? This isn't about a grudge, I said, my voice hardening. This is about integrity. You were willing to destroy my professional reputation to smooth the path for your IPO. You tried to erase 10 years of my contributions to make your origin story more appealing to investors. You betrayed every principle this company was founded on. I turned to Patricia and the other board members. Did you know that the Meridian deal that saved Vertex in year 3 was closed primarily through my efforts? That I missed my grandfather's funeral to prepare the presentation that convinced them to sign? That's not in the official company history anymore. Richard has been systematically removing the early team members who might contradict his revised version of events. Patricia was looking increasingly troubled. Richard, is this accurate? Richard spread his hands. Patricia, in any growing company, there are personnel changes. We've been bringing in experienced executives who can help take Vertex to the next level. That's just good business. And falsifying cause for termination? Erasing contributions? Is that also good business? I challenged. Before Richard could respond, the boardroom door opened and James Turner, my property manager, entered with a distinguished-looking man in his 60s. I apologize for the interruption, James said, but Mr. Parker asked me to bring Mr. Alexander Lloyd as soon as he arrived. A murmur ran through the room at the name. Alexander Lloyd was the CEO of Meridian Global, the client whose contract had saved Vertex all those years ago. He was also one of the most respected figures in the industry. Alex, I said, standing to shake his hand. Thank you for coming on such short notice. For you, Daniel? Of course. Alex nodded politely to the rest of the room before taking the empty seat beside me. Richard looked thoroughly confused. Mr. Lloyd, while we're always pleased to see a valued client, I'm not sure what your role is in this internal matter. Alex gave Richard a cool look. I received a concerning call from Daniel yesterday. He informed me that Vertex had accused him of engaging in employment discussions with Meridian, discussions that never took place. As this accusation involves my company and could potentially damage our reputation for ethical business practices, I felt it necessary to address it personally. He turned to the board members. I want to be absolutely clear. At no point has Daniel Parker discussed employment opportunities with anyone at Meridian. Our relationship has been strictly professional and always transparent. Furthermore, I feel compelled to set the record straight about the history between our companies. Alex proceeded to recount in explicit detail how I had been the driving force behind securing the Meridian contract, from the initial outreach to the final negotiation. He described my dedication, professionalism, and the pivotal role I had played in establishing the partnership that had ultimately launched Vertex into profitability. When I heard how Daniel's contributions had been minimized in recent company narratives, Alex concluded, I was, frankly, appalled. It calls into question the integrity of Vertex's current leadership, which in turn makes me question whether Meridian should be continuing our relationship with your company. The threat was clear and devastating. Meridian remained Vertex's largest client, accounting for nearly 25% of annual revenue. Losing them weeks before an IPO would be catastrophic. Richard was ashen. Mr. Lloyd, I assure you there's been a misunderstanding. Daniel's contributions have always been valued at Vertex. Save it, Richard, I cut in. The time for damage control is over. I turned to the board members. I came here today out of curiosity and perhaps a lingering sense of responsibility to the company I helped build. But I've heard enough. Here's what's going to happen next. I pulled another document from my briefcase. This is a settlement proposal. In exchange for not pursuing penalties under the lease agreement, Vertex will issue a public statement acknowledging my contributions over the past decade and retracting any explicit or implicit accusations regarding Meridian. You will honor the current lease terms until expiration in 4 months, at which point you will vacate the premises without the option to renew. I paused, letting the terms sink in. Additionally, you will provide severance packages to any original team members who choose to leave Vertex in the next 6 months. Packages that reflect their actual tenure and contributions, not the revised history you've been peddling, Patricia. Wilson leaned forward. And if we agree to these terms? Then I walk away. No penalties, no lease termination. Just a clean break that allows Vertex to proceed with its IPO without the disruption of an ugly legal battle and potential client exodus. I glanced at Alex, who nodded slightly. The board members huddled together, whispering urgently. Richard attempted to interject several times but was pointedly ignored. After a few minutes, Patricia straightened. The board will need to deliberate on this proposal, she said formally. But speaking personally, I find the terms surprisingly reasonable given the circumstances. She shot a disapproving look at Richard. I would also like to extend the board's apologies for the treatment you've received, Daniel. It falls well below the standard of conduct we expect from our executive team. Richard looked like he'd been slapped. Jason Wells was visibly seething. Vanessa Cooper was staring at her lap, clearly sensing which way the wind was blowing. Take all the time you need, I said, rising from my chair. My attorney will be available to finalize the details once you've reached a decision. As I gathered my things, Martha stood as well. If you'll excuse me, I should compile the financial projections for both scenarios to assist the board in their deliberation. She followed me out of the boardroom, and once the door closed behind us, let out a small satisfied smile. That, she said quietly, was masterful. Think they'll accept? They'd be fools not to. It's the cleanest exit possible from a mess entirely of Richard's making. We walked toward my old office, which still sat empty, personal items in boxes, along one wall. And your decision? I asked. Martha didn't hesitate. I'm in. Launchpad Partners needs a CFO who knows how to navigate startup finances, and I need colleagues I can trust. She glanced back toward the boardroom. I don't think I'm looking at them anymore. I smiled, feeling a weight lifting from my shoulders. Have dinner with Liam and me tonight? He's flying in early. Wouldn't miss it, Martha replied. As we reached the office door, I paused, looking at the space I had occupied for a decade. So many memories, good and bad. But instead of nostalgia, I felt only anticipation for what lay ahead. Daniel! I turned to see Emily hurrying toward us, eyes bright with curiosity. What happened? The whole floor is buzzing. I exchanged glances with Martha, then made a decision. Emily, do you have a minute? There's something I'd like to discuss with you about the future of digital marketing for startups. By the end of the day, the board had unanimously accepted my settlement terms, with one addition. Patricia Wilson requested a private meeting where she offered to personally invest in Launchpad Partners once we were established. I back people, not just companies, she told me. And I should have paid more attention to who was really driving Vertex's success all these years. Within a week, Launchpad Partners was officially incorporated with 4 founding partners: Liam, Martha, Emily, and myself. We leased temporary office space while waiting for Vertex to vacate the second floor of the Parker building. True to his nature, Richard attempted one last power play, threatening to delay the move-out unless certain terms were modified. A single phone call from Alex Lloyd, hinting at Meridian's willingness to review their contract should Vertex breach our agreement, resolved the issue overnight. 4 months later, on a crisp fall morning, I stood in the newly renovated offices of Launchpad Partners on the second floor of the Parker building. Gone were the sterile corporate elements of Vertex's design, replaced by open collaborative spaces, vibrant colors, and walls showcasing the success stories of our first clients. Our team had grown to 15 people, including several former Vertex employees who had jumped ship once our venture became public. Our client roster was small but promising, with 3 startups already showing significant growth under our guidance. As I looked out over the Philadelphia skyline from the same windows, where I had once plotted marketing strategies for Richard's vision, I felt not triumph or vindication, but peace. The betrayal that had seemed so devastating had ultimately freed me to build something more aligned with my values. A company where contributions were recognized, ethics weren't optional, and success was measured not just in profits, but in relationships. My phone buzzed with a text from Liam. Conference room in 5. Potential new client. Big fish. I smiled and pocketed my phone. The past was settled. The future was calling. And this time, I was building something that was truly mine. 6 months after Launchpad Partners opened its doors, we had established ourselves as one of Philadelphia's most promising business consultancies. Our unique approach, combining Liam's coaching expertise, my marketing strategies, Martha's financial acumen, and Emily's digital innovation, had attracted a diverse portfolio of clients. We'd grown to a team of 23, occupying the entire second floor of the Parker building. The big fish client Liam had texted me about turned out to be TechFusion, a medical software startup that had developed a revolutionary patient management system. Their brilliant product was hampered by inexperienced leadership and chaotic marketing. Within 3 months of our guidance, they'd secured second-round funding and doubled their user base. Our reputation spread quickly through Philadelphia's growing tech community. We weren't just consultants, we were partners who rolled up our sleeves and worked in the trenches with our clients. We celebrated their victories as our own and pulled all-nighters when deadlines loomed. It reminded me of the early days at Vertex, before ambition had corrupted the culture. Speaking of Vertex, their IPO had proceeded as planned, though with less fanfare than Richard had undoubtedly hoped for. Their share price opened moderately, strong but had flatlined since. Industry analysts pointed to leadership concerns and cultural issues as potential growth inhibitors. I didn't follow the news closely. I was too busy building something new to worry about the past. Until one rainy Tuesday morning when Martha burst into my office without knocking, her face flushed with an emotion I couldn't immediately identify. Have you seen this? She demanded, holding up her tablet. I took it from her and scanned the headline. Vertex Technologies stock plummets, 32% following CEO's abrupt resignation. Richard resigned? I asked, genuinely surprised. Not exactly resigned, Martha said, taking the tablet back and scrolling down. According to this, the board asked for his resignation following an internal investigation into patterns of mismanagement and misrepresentation. They don't spell it out, but reading between the lines, they discovered more creative revisions. To company history, I finished for her. I'm guessing we weren't the only ones who got the Richard Manning special treatment. Martha nodded. Patricia Wilson is stepping in as interim CEO while they search for a permanent replacement. There's speculation that Jason Wells is also on his way out. I leaned back in my chair, processing this information. I had moved on from Vertex emotionally, but I couldn't deny the slight satisfaction I felt at Richard's downfall. It wasn't vengeance. It was accountability. The most interesting part, Martha continued, a spark of something that looked suspiciously like mischief in her eyes, is the market reaction. Vertex's share price is tanking because investors are losing confidence in the company's stability and future direction. They need a strong leader who understands the company's roots and can right the ship. I narrowed my eyes at her tone. Martha, why are you telling me this with that look on your face? She placed the tablet on my desk and crossed her arms. Because Patricia Wilson called me this morning. She wants to meet with you. With me? Why would... I stopped mid-sentence as understanding dawned. No, absolutely not. There's no universe in which I would consider going back to Vertex. Martha held up her hands. I'm just the messenger. But for what it's worth, I think you should at least hear her out. Patricia was always one of the good ones. I shook my head firmly. I'm happy here. We're building something special with Launchpad. Why would I abandon that to save the company that betrayed me? Maybe not to save it, Martha suggested. Maybe to transform it. I dismissed the idea, but the seed had been planted. Later that day, I found myself on the Parker Building's rooftop garden, a space I'd created for employees to recharge and find inspiration. The Philadelphia skyline stretched before me, the afternoon sun glinting off glass and steel. Among the buildings stood Vertex's new headquarters. They had moved to a modern glass tower after vacating my building. I pulled out my phone and dialed Patricia Wilson's number before I could talk myself out of it. Daniel, she answered on the second ring. Thank you for calling. I was hoping we could meet. I'm listening, I said, neither agreeing nor refusing. Not over the phone, she replied. This conversation should happen face to face. Dinner tonight? The Capitol Grill at 7? I hesitated only briefly. I'll be there. The Capitol Grill was a power dining spot favored by Philadelphia's business elite. I arrived precisely at 7 to find Patricia already seated in a private corner booth. At 62, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had broken through countless glass ceilings and never looked back. Her steel gray hair was cut in a sharp bob that framed her keen eyes and determined jaw. After we ordered, Patricia wasted no time on small talk. Vertex is in trouble, Daniel. Serious trouble. So I've heard. Richard's leadership style finally caught up with him. Patricia's mouth thinned. That's putting it mildly. Once we started looking closer at his management decisions, we found a pattern of deception that went well beyond rewriting company history. He manipulated data, misrepresented growth projections, and fostered a culture of fear that drove away some of our best talent. Including me, I pointed out. Especially you, she agreed. Which brings me to why I asked you here. The board wants you to come back to Vertex, Daniel. Not as CMO, but as CEO. Though I had suspected this might be her agenda, hearing it stated so bluntly still stunned me. You can't be serious. Deadly serious. Vertex needs a leader who understands our core business, who helped build it from the ground up, and who has the integrity that Richard ultimately lacked. Patricia, I walked away from Vertex for good reasons. I've started a new company that's flourishing. Why would I leave that behind? She leaned forward, her gaze intense. Because despite everything, you still care about what happens to Vertex. Because there are hundreds of employees whose livelihoods depend on the company surviving this crisis. And because you're smart enough to see the opportunity here. Opportunity? To clean up Richard's mess? To rebuild Vertex into the company you always thought it could be, she corrected. You would have complete autonomy to restructure the executive team, revamp the culture, refocus our product strategy, whatever you think is necessary. I shook my head, still resistant. What about Launchpad partners? I have obligations to my team, my partners, our clients. Patricia smiled slightly. I've given that some thought. What if Vertex acquired Launchpad Partners? Your entire team comes aboard, your clients become Vertex clients, and you leverage Vertex's resources to expand your vision on a much larger scale. The proposal was bold, unexpected. I took a sip of water, buying time to think. And the board would support this acquisition? Unanimously. In fact, it was my colleague Thomas Blackwell who suggested it. He's been following your work with Tech Fusion and was impressed with the results. I sat back, mind racing with possibilities I hadn't considered. Merging Launchpad with Vertex would give us access to resources and reach we couldn't achieve on our own for years. But it would also mean returning to the company that had discarded me, albeit under very different circumstances. I would need to discuss this with my partners, I said finally. This isn't just my decision to make. Of course, Patricia nodded. But I should mention, we need an answer quickly. The market is losing confidence every day and several larger competitors are circling, looking at a potential hostile takeover. If that happens, Vertex gets dismantled for parts, I finished, understanding the urgency. The company I had helped build would cease to exist, and hundreds of people would lose their jobs. Despite everything, that prospect bothered me more than I wanted to admit. I'll talk to my team tomorrow, I promised. You'll have our decision within 48 hours. The next morning, I gathered Liam, Martha, and Emily in our conference room and laid out Patricia's proposal. Their reactions were mixed, as I had expected. Absolutely not, was Liam's immediate response. Why would we tie ourselves to a sinking ship? We're doing fine on our own. It's not quite sinking yet, Martha pointed out. Vertex still has strong fundamentals and a solid client base. With the right leadership, she glanced meaningfully at me. Emily, who had been quiet, finally spoke up. I left Vertex because I believed in what we're building here, but I also left behind colleagues I care about, people whose jobs are at risk if Vertex fails. She twisted, a pen between her fingers thoughtfully. What would the acquisition mean for our team? For our way of doing things? According to Patricia, we'd have autonomy, I explained. Our team stays intact. Our methods become Vertex methods. But we gain their resources, their client network, their established market position. And you become CEO of a public company, Liam noted. That's a very different role than what you're doing now. The pressure, the scrutiny. Are you sure that's what you want? It was a fair question, one I had been wrestling with all night. 6 months ago, I would have said no without hesitation. But now, I paused, organizing my thoughts. Richard nearly destroyed everything we built at Vertex by putting ego and image above substance and values. Maybe the company deserves another chance with leadership that remembers what made it special in the first place. Martha smiled. You still care about Vertex. I care about the people there, I clarified. I care about the vision we originally had. And yes, maybe there's a part of me that wants to prove that success and integrity aren't mutually exclusive. The discussion continued for hours. We brought in our senior team members for their perspectives, ran financial projections, and debated potential scenarios. By late afternoon, a consensus began to emerge. Launchpad Partners had always been about helping promising companies navigate difficult transitions. Perhaps Vertex was simply our biggest client yet. 2 days later, I sat across from Patricia Wilson and the Vertex board, Liam, Martha, and Emily beside me. We're prepared to move forward with the acquisition, I announced, under specific conditions. I outlined our terms. Launchpad would be acquired as a wholly owned subsidiary that maintained its own brand and operational independence. Our entire team would join Vertex with guaranteed positions for at least 2 years. I would become CEO of Vertex, with Liam as Chief Strategy Officer, Martha returning to her role as CFO, and Emily stepping in as the new CMO. Additionally, I continued, we want a complete cultural reset. That means a comprehensive review of all executive decisions made under Richard's leadership. proper recognition for overlooked contributions, and a commitment to transparency with both employees and shareholders moving forward. The board members listened attentively, occasionally making notes. When I finished, Patricia looked around the table at her colleagues before turning back to me with a small smile. "These terms are acceptable to the board," she said. "In fact, they align perfectly with the direction we hoped you would take the company. Welcome back to Vertex, Daniel. Or perhaps I should say, welcome to the new Vertex you'll be creating." The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. The acquisition was announced to immediate positive market reaction. Vertex's share price jumped 18% on the news. The media narrative shifted from troubled tech company in leadership crisis to innovative restructuring led by returning founder. I never corrected the founder label, though technically it wasn't accurate. In a way, this was a refounding of Vertex, a return to first principles with the wisdom gained from experience. My first day back at Vertex headquarters was surreal. As I walked through the gleaming lobby of the glass tower, employees stopped to watch, many offering tentative smiles or nods of recognition. Some were faces I knew, many were new. All seemed cautiously hopeful about what my return might mean. The executive floor had been Richard's domain, designed to impress and intimidate with its excessive luxury. My first official act as CEO was to announce its conversion into a collaborative workspace for cross-departmental teams. I chose a modest office on the main floor, with glass walls and an open-door policy. In my first company-wide meeting, I stood before hundreds of employees, both in person and joining virtually from other offices. "Some of you know me," I began. "Some of you have only heard stories, and I suspect the version of those stories depends on who was telling them." This earned a ripple of knowing laughter. Today, we begin writing a new story together. I outlined my vision for Vertex 2.0, a company that valued substance over appearance, collaboration over hierarchy, and long-term growth over quarterly theatrics. I introduced the Launchpad team and explained how their approach to nurturing business potential would inform our go-forward strategy. "This transition won't be seamless," I acknowledged. "Change rarely is. But I make you this promise. Every decision we make will be guided by two questions. Is it good for our clients, and is it good for our people? If the answer to both is yes, we move forward. If not, we will find a better way." The response was cautious optimism, exactly what I had expected. Trust would need to be rebuilt day by day, decision by decision. I was prepared for that journey. One of my first executive decisions was to reinstate quarterly town halls where anyone could ask unfiltered questions of leadership. At the first such event, a junior developer raised his hand with a question that hushed the room. "With all due respect, Mr. Parker," he began nervously, "how do we know you won't become another Richard Manning? Power changed him. Couldn't it change you too?" A tense silence fell as people held their breath, waiting for my reaction to such a direct challenge. But it was a legitimate concern, one I had contemplated myself. "That's an excellent question," I said, genuinely appreciative of his candor. "Power doesn't corrupt automatically. It reveals and amplifies what's already there." Richard lost sight of what truly mattered. My job, our job collectively, is to keep centered on our core values. I stepped away from the podium and moved closer to the audience. "But you shouldn't take my word for it. Watch what I do, not what I say. Hold me accountable. Question decisions that don't make sense. That transparency and accountability is precisely what will keep us honest." The developer nodded, seeming satisfied with the answer. The tension in the room dissipated, replaced by something more valuable. The first fragile roots of authentic trust. In the following months, we implemented a series of changes that signaled our new direction. We revamped the bonus structure to reward collaboration rather than individual achievement. We instituted a founder mentality program where employees could pitch innovative ideas directly to leadership. We revisited client relationships that had been neglected under the previous regime, with me personally reaching out to key accounts. One such call was to Alex Lloyd at Meridian. Daniel Parker as CEO, he chuckled when I shared the news. The universe has a sense of irony after all. More like poetic justice, I replied. I'm hoping we can strengthen our partnership under this new chapter. With you at the helm? Absolutely. In fact, we've been considering expanding our contract to include the European market rollout. Perhaps we should discuss that soon. Not every day was smooth sailing. Jason Wells's loyalists in upper management resisted changes, sometimes actively undermining initiatives. I avoided the urge to clean house immediately, instead giving everyone a chance to adapt. Some rose to the challenge admirably. Others quickly found themselves outpaced by colleagues who embraced our new direction. 6 months into my tenure as CEO, Vertex released quarterly results that exceeded market expectations. Our share price hit an all-time high, and analyst reports praised the cultural revitalization that had employees and clients alike renewing their commitment to the company. That evening, I hosted a small gathering at my home for the original Launchpad team and a few trusted Vertex veterans. As we stood, on my balcony, glasses raised in a toast to our progress, Martha nudged my shoulder. So, did you ever imagine when Richard fired you that you'd end up with his job, his company, and his corner office, which you promptly gave away? I laughed. Not even close. I was just trying to figure out my next step. Sometimes the universe has bigger plans, Liam observed, though your ownership of the building certainly helped nudge the universe along. We all chuckled at that. Emily, who had thrived as CMO, bringing fresh energy to Vertex's marketing approach, raised her glass. Higher. To the building that changed everything, she proposed. No, I countered gently. To knowing your own worth, even when others don't, and to building something better after betrayal. As glasses clinked and conversation flowed, I gazed out at the city lights, at the silhouette of the Parker building standing proudly among newer, flashier towers, much like its owner had found his place among corporate leaders without losing his fundamental values. The journey from fired employee to CEO had been unexpected and challenging, but standing here, surrounded by colleagues who had become friends, leading a company now genuinely committed to the principles I believed in, I wouldn't have changed a single step of the path. Sometimes losing what you thought you wanted opens the door to what you truly deserve. And sometimes, the building you own turns out to be the smallest part of what you're really building. 1 year after taking the helm at Vertex, I stood on stage at TechCrunch Disrupt, one of the industry's premier conferences. The moderator, Alicia Donovan, a respected tech journalist known for her incisive questioning, leaned forward in her chair. Daniel Parker, your story has become something of a legend in Silicon Valley, she began. From being unceremoniously fired to returning as CEO in what many call the most dramatic corporate comeback of the decade. But what most people don't know is what happened behind the scenes. Take us through those first critical months after the acquisition. I smiled, adjusting the microphone. The transition was certainly educational. When you're building something from scratch, as we did with Launchpad Partners, you have the luxury of establishing your culture from day one. Transforming an existing company's culture is infinitely more complex. Especially one where you were previously fired, Alicia pointed out, earning chuckles from the audience. That did add a certain ironic flavor to the situation, I acknowledged, but it also gave me unique insight. I had experienced Vertex at its best during the early years and at its worst when I was terminated. That perspective helped me identify exactly what needed to change. What I didn't mention on stage was the resistance I'd encountered from entrenched executives who had thrived under Richard's leadership. Jason Wells had departed almost immediately after my appointment, recognizing that his approach was fundamentally incompatible with my vision. But he'd left behind a cadre of lieutenants steeped in his win-at-all-costs mentality. The most challenging had been Dominic Reeves, the chief product officer who had been Jason's right-hand man. 2 months into my tenure, I discovered that Dominic had been holding separate product strategy meetings that deliberately excluded Launchpad team members, effectively creating a shadow decision-making process. When confronted, he had been unapologetic. With all due respect, Daniel, the Launchpad approach might work for fledgling startups, but Vertex is a mature company with established methodologies. We can't risk our market position on untested strategies. Untested? I had echoed incredulously. The strategies that built Vertex from nothing to a market leader are hardly untested. What's untested is the culture of secrecy and exclusion that developed under Richard and Jason, and the results speak for themselves. A tanking stock price, declining client satisfaction, and an exodus of talent. The confrontation had ended with Dominic's resignation, which triggered similar departures among his closest allies. Some board members had expressed concern about losing so many executives in rapid succession, but Patricia Wilson had remained steadfast in her support. "Sometimes you need to remove the diseased branches to save the tree," she had told the nervous shareholders during a special meeting. "Daniel isn't making these changes out of vindictiveness. He's making them because they're necessary for Vertex's long-term health." On stage at TechCrunch, I continued with the sanitized version of events. The key was identifying the core strengths that had made Vertex successful in the first place: innovation, client-centric solutions, and collaborative problem-solving, and rebuilding our practices around those fundamentals. "And the results speak for themselves," Alicia noted. "Vertex's share price has increased 87% since you took over. Client retention is at an all-time high. And according to industry surveys, Vertex has become one of the most sought-after employers in the tech sector." "What's your secret?" I considered the question carefully. There's no secret formula. We simply recognized that exceptional products come from exceptional people who feel valued, heard, and connected to a larger purpose. Everything else, profits, market share, stock price, flows from that foundation. The audience applauded, but I noticed a thoughtful expression cross Alicia's face as the clapping subsided. "Yet your predecessor, Richard Manning, has recently launched a new venture with several former Vertex executives," she pointed out. "Nexus Technologies is positioning itself as a direct competitor, with Manning publicly stating that Vertex has lost its edge under your leadership. How do you respond to that?" I had been expecting this question. Richard's new company had been making waves in the industry with aggressive marketing and bold claims. Several former clients had been approached, with promises of revolutionary solutions that would make Vertex's offerings obsolete. "I wish Richard and his team well," I said diplomatically. "The tech space is large enough for multiple successful companies, and competition ultimately benefits the consumer. As for Vertex losing its edge," I smiled slightly. "I prefer to let our innovations and client satisfaction metrics speak for themselves." What I didn't add was that 2 of the clients Richard had poached had already quietly approached us about returning, citing delivery issues and inflated promises at Nexus. Or that 3 senior developers who had followed Richard to his new venture had reached out to me personally about returning to Vertex, disillusioned by what they described as the same old toxic culture in a new wrapper. The conversation shifted to Vertex's latest product developments and our expansion into international markets. By the time the panel concluded, several industry analysts were already tweeting positive reactions to my balanced responses regarding Richard's competitive posturing. Backstage, I found Liam waiting with 2 bottles of water. "Nicely handled," he said, handing me one. "Though I was half hoping you'd mention the Walker client situation." I unscrewed the cap and took a long drink. "And give Richard advance warning that Walker is coming back to us? Not a chance. Let him find out when Walker signs the new contract next week," Liam grinned. "Fair point." "Oh," Emily texted. "The Rentec demo went perfectly. Looks like we'll be adding another major client to the portfolio." "That's 3 this quarter," I noted. The integration strategy is working better than we projected. When we had merged Launchpad partners with Vertex, one of our key challenges had been integrating our boutique consulting approach with Vertex's larger-scale operations. We had solved this by creating specialized client teams that combined Launchpad's high-touch methodology with Vertex's robust technical resources, essentially getting the best of both worlds. The Seattle team wants you to stop by their office on your way back to Philadelphia, Liam added as we exited the backstage area. Apparently, they have something to show you that can't be adequately demonstrated over video conference. Intriguing. I have a meeting with Softgate tomorrow morning, but I could fly up tomorrow afternoon. Already booked the flight, Liam confirmed. Martha says to remind you about the capital allocation meeting on Friday. She needs your final input on the expansion budget. Our expansion plans were ambitious. New offices in Austin and Toronto, an innovation lab in Boston, and a European headquarters in Amsterdam. It represented the largest growth initiative in Vertex's history, fueled by our recent successes and strong financial position. As we made our way through the conference center, I was stopped repeatedly by industry colleagues, potential clients, and even a few former Vertex employees who had heard I was attending. One such encounter was particularly meaningful. Ted Lawson, a brilliant developer who had been part of the original Vertex team but had left during Richard's tenure. "Daniel," he called, breaking away from a group discussion to intercept me. "I heard you were speaking today. It's great to see you." "Ted," I greeted him warmly. "It's been what, 4 years? Last I heard you were working for GlobeTech." 3 years there. Then I started my own thing last year," he explained. "Small development shop focused on accessibility technology. 10 people, but we're growing steadily." "That's fantastic," I said sincerely. "Always knew you'd make an impact in that space." Ted hesitated, then lowered his voice slightly. "Look, I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I've been following what you're doing at Vertex. The transformation is impressive, really impressive. Thank you. It's been a team effort." "That's actually why I wanted to catch you," Ted continued. "My company, Access Point, has developed some innovative interfaces for users with visual impairments. We're looking for a strategic partner to help scale the technology, and given Vertex's new direction under your leadership." I immediately understood where he was heading. "Send me a proposal," I said, handing him my card. "I'll make sure it gets priority review." Ted's face lit up. "Seriously? Just like that?" "Just like that," I confirmed. Vertex was built on recognizing potential and supporting innovation. We're getting back to those roots. As Ted walked away, visibly energized by the exchange, Liam leaned in. "Another acquisition prospect? Possibly. But more importantly, it's a chance to bring another original team member back into the fold." I checked my watch. "We should head to the airport. I want to review the Softgate presentation before tomorrow's meeting." The following day, after successfully closing the Softgate deal, I found myself in Vertex's Seattle office, being led to a secure development lab by Megan Chen, our Chief Innovation Officer. Megan had been one of my most inspired hires, a brilliant technologist with a PhD from MIT who had previously worked at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. "We've been developing this in stealth mode for 6 months," she explained, as she swiped her security card at the lab entrance. "Only the Seattle team and a few key engineers from Philadelphia have been involved." The lab contained several workstations, arranged in a semicircle, all facing a central demonstration area. The team of 8 developers stood as we entered, their expressions a mix of pride and nervous anticipation. "So what's this mysterious project that couldn't be shown over video?" I asked, genuinely curious. Instead of answering directly, Megan nodded to one of the engineers who typed a command into his terminal. A holographic display flickered to life in the center of the room, showing what appeared to be a 3-dimensional workspace filled with floating data, visualizations, code blocks, and system architectures. "We call it NeuroSync," Megan said, her voice betraying her excitement. It's an integrated development environment that uses spatial computing and neural interface technology to allow programmers to literally see and manipulate code structures in three-dimensional space. I watched, fascinated, as one of the engineers donned a lightweight headset and began interacting with the holographic elements, rearranging components with intuitive hand gestures and verbal commands. The neural interface reads the user's intentions, Megan continued, meaning the system can anticipate actions based on thought patterns. It reduces coding time by approximately 60% in our initial tests, with a corresponding decrease in bugs and implementation errors. This is extraordinary, I said, moving closer to observe the demonstration. How far are we from a marketable version? 4 months for a beta release to select development partners, Megan replied. 9 months for a public launch, assuming we prioritize resources. The implications were staggering. This technology could revolutionize software development, giving Vertex a substantial competitive advantage in multiple markets, including Richard's Nexus technologies. You'll have whatever resources you need, I assured her. This is exactly the kind of innovation that will define Vertex's future. As the team continued demonstrating NeuroSync's capabilities, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. If Richard hadn't fired me, I would never have founded Launchpad Partners. If I hadn't owned the building, I might not have had the leverage to negotiate favorable terms with Vertex. If Patricia hadn't recognized the value of reuniting Vertex with its original vision, I wouldn't be standing here witnessing a technological breakthrough that could transform the industry. It was a chain of events that no one could have predicted. Least of all Richard when he had coldly dismissed my contributions and escorted me from the building that fateful day. Back in Philadelphia 2 days later, I met with Martha to finalize the capital allocation for our expansion plans and to discuss the resource requirements for the NeuroSync project. We can accelerate the timeline if we reallocate funds from the Amsterdam office, Martha suggested as we reviewed the projections. European expansion could wait until Q3 next year without significantly impacting our growth targets. I considered this option but shook my head. No, we stick to the original plan. NeuroSync is important, but not at the expense of our global strategy. Let's look at other funding options, perhaps a targeted round specifically for the new technology. Martha nodded approvingly. Always the balanced approach. Richard would have sacrificed everything else to rush the flashy new product to market. And that's precisely why we're succeeding where he failed, I pointed out. Long-term vision over short-term gains. It's not complicated, just disciplined. Our meeting was interrupted by a call from Patricia Wilson. Martha moved to leave and give me privacy, but I gestured for her to stay. Patricia, you're on speaker with Martha and me, I said after accepting the call. What's up? I just got off the phone with Alex Lloyd from Meridian, Patricia began without preamble. They're terminating their contract with Nexus Technologies, effective immediately, and want to discuss expanding their relationship with us. Apparently, Richard promised them capabilities that didn't actually exist. Martha and I exchanged knowing glances. Richard's habit of over-promising and under-delivering had been a recurring issue during his leadership of Vertex. Did Alex say anything else? I asked, suspecting there was more to the story. Only that Richard tried to blame the implementation failures on the team he poached from us, Patricia replied, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. Alex wasn't buying. He specifically mentioned that Nexus lacks the integrity and collaborative approach that defined their relationship with you. After the call ended, Martha leaned back in her chair with a thoughtful expression. You know, when Richard fired you, he thought he was eliminating a threat to his narrative. Instead, he created his most formidable competitor. Competitor? I echoed, raising an eyebrow. Nexus isn't our competition, Martha. They're a cautionary tale. She laughed at that. True enough. So, shall I set up a meeting with Meridian to discuss expansion terms? Absolutely. And let's invite Ted Lawson from Access Point to join our accessibility integration team. His technology could be a perfect complement to what we're developing in Seattle. As Martha left to make the arrangements, I found myself alone in my office, gazing out at the Philadelphia skyline. The Parker Building was visible in the distance, a constant reminder of where this journey had begun. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a small item I kept as a personal talisman, the visitor badge. I had been given on that pivotal day when I returned to Vertex for the meeting that changed everything. It was a humble plastic clip with "Visitor" printed in bold letters, a temporary identity assigned to someone who had helped build the very space he was entering. The irony still made me smile. From employee to visitor to CEO. A transformation. Unimaginable the day Richard had callously discarded a decade of loyalty. My phone chimed with a message from Emily. "Just heard about Meridian ditching Nexus. Karma really does come full circle, doesn't it?" I typed back, "It's not about karma. It's about fundamentals. Build something authentic, and the right people find their way to you." After sending the message, I returned the visitor badge to its place in my drawer and turned to my computer. There was still so much to do: expansion plans to finalize, the NeuroSync project to support, potential acquisition targets to evaluate, client relationships to nurture. But unlike the driven young marketing director who had once worked 16-hour days out of fear and ambition, I now approached these challenges with a sense of purpose and balance. Success wasn't measured in stock prices or market share alone, but in the culture we were building, the innovations we were fostering, and the lives we were impacting, both those of our employees and the users of our products. Richard had never understood that fundamental truth, which is why his new venture was already showing cracks in its foundation. He was still chasing the appearance of success rather than its substance, still prioritizing personal glory over collective achievement. As I began reviewing the latest product development reports, a notification appeared on my screen. An industry news alert. Nexus Technologies faces investor scrutiny after high-profile client departures. I clicked through briefly, scanning the article that detailed mounting concerns about Richard's leadership following Meridian's exit and rumors of other clients considering similar moves. I closed the article without finishing it. Richard's story was no longer entwined with mine, and I had more important matters to focus on. The past had served its purpose in shaping my path forward. Now it was time to build the future, one defined not by revenge or vindication, but by vision and values. The visitor badge in my drawer would remain as a reminder not of betrayal, but of transformation. And the building that had started it all would stand as a symbol not of ownership, but of foundation, the solid ground upon which something truly meaningful could be built. 18 months after taking over as Vertex CEO, I faced the most significant challenge yet to the company's revitalized culture. The opportunity came disguised as a crisis, as the most important opportunities often do. It began with a routine product development meeting for NeuroSync, our groundbreaking spatial computing platform. The beta release had been wildly successful, with development partners reporting productivity increases that exceeded even our optimistic projections. We were 6 weeks away from the public launch when Megan Chen, our Chief Innovation Officer, requested an urgent private meeting. "We have a problem," she said without preamble when I closed my office door. Her normally composed demeanor was visibly shaken, and she clutched a tablet with white knuckles. "What kind of problem?" I asked, gesturing for her to sit. "A security breach. Someone accessed the core NeuroSync architecture and exfiltrated key components of the proprietary code. We discovered it during a routine security scan this morning." I felt a cold weight settle in my stomach. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough that if the code gets into the wrong hands, they could potentially replicate central aspects of our technology. Not the neural interface, that's protected under different protocols, but enough of the spatial rendering engine to create a competitive product." "Do we know who's responsible?" Megan inhaled deeply. "That's the worst part. The breach was executed, using administrative credentials belonging to Tyler Bennett. The name hit me like a physical blow. Tyler was one of our most trusted senior developers, someone I had personally recruited back to Vertex after Richard's departure. He had been instrumental in the early development of NeuroSync and had access to most of the system's critical components. There must be some mistake, I said, voicing the thought aloud. Tyler has been with us from the beginning. He helped build this company twice over. I've triple-checked the logs myself, Megan replied grimly. The access came from his credentials, during non-working hours, from an external IP address that we've traced to a coffee shop in downtown Philadelphia. The data was transferred to an encrypted external drive. It's him, Daniel. My mind raced through possibilities. Could his credentials have been stolen? Was he being coerced? Or had he simply decided that the intellectual property was worth more to him elsewhere? Where is Tyler now? I asked. In the Philadelphia office, working as usual. He doesn't know we've detected the breach. I stood and paced to the window, weighing options. Under Richard's leadership, the response would have been swift and merciless. Immediate termination, legal threats, possibly even criminal charges filed before the day was out. It would have been the decisive leadership that Wall Street analysts praised, and it would have been exactly the wrong approach if there were any complexity to the situation. I want to talk to him, I decided. In person, not over video. Have security discreetly monitor him but take no action until I get back to Philadelphia. I'll be on the next flight. You're going to confront him yourself? Megan asked, surprised. Not confront. Listen. I turned from the window. There's something we're missing here, and I won't make decisions without all the facts. That's not how we operate anymore. 5 hours later, I was back in Philadelphia, having reviewed the security logs during the flight. The evidence was damning. Tyler had indeed accessed the system at 11:42 p.m. the previous night, downloading substantial portions of the proprietary code to an external device. But the pattern was odd. Single access, no attempt to cover his tracks, almost as if he wanted to be caught. I found him in the developer bullpen, headphones on, intensely focused on his monitor. He didn't notice me until I tapped his shoulder. When he turned and saw me, his expression shifted from surprise to resignation. "Conference room B, please," I said quietly. He nodded wordlessly and followed me. Once inside the glass-walled space, I closed the door and sat across from him. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. "I know why you're here," Tyler finally said, voice barely above a whisper. "I can explain." "I'm listening," I replied simply. He looked up, clearly surprised by the lack of accusation in my tone. You want to hear my side?" "Of course I do. You've been with Vertex almost as long as I have. You helped build NeuroSync from a concept to a revolutionary platform. There has to be a reason for what happened last night." Tyler's composure cracked. His shoulders slumped, and he pressed his palms against his eyes. "It's my daughter, Emma. She has a rare form of leukemia. The experimental treatment that could save her life cost $1.8 million, and insurance won't cover it because it's still in clinical trials." I felt my chest tighten. I knew Tyler had a daughter, but he had always been private about his personal life. "Tyler, why didn't you come to me, to HR? We have emergency medical funds, charitable foundations we work with." "I did," he interrupted, a flash of frustration crossing his face. "I went through all the official channels. The company fund could offer $50,000. The foundation grant might cover another $100,000. But the treatment window is closing, and I was still over $1 million short. And then? Then I got a call." Tyler's voice hardened. "From Jason Wells." The name hung in the air between us. Jason, Richard's former right-hand man, had maintained connections throughout the industry despite his tarnished reputation. He said he knew about Emma's condition, said he had investors who could ensure she got the treatment she needed. All I had to do was provide certain technical materials from the NeuroSync project. Tyler's expression was a mixture of shame and defiance. What was I supposed to do? Let my daughter die to protect company secrets? I absorbed this information, pieces clicking into place. The data transfer last night. You haven't actually delivered it to Jason yet? Tyler shook his head. The exchange is scheduled for tonight. I have the drive in my apartment safe. I leaned forward. And you used your own credentials, made no attempt to hide your tracks. Almost as if you wanted to be caught before it went too far. For the first time, Tyler met my gaze directly. Maybe I did. I don't know anymore. I just know I can't let Emma die, but I couldn't just betray everything we've built here without at least giving someone the chance to stop me. In that moment, I saw not a security threat, but a father drowning in an impossible situation. And I recognized a critical juncture for Vertex, not just a potential technology breach, but a test of the very values I had been championing since taking over as CEO. Tyler, I'm going to ask you to give me 24 hours before you do anything. With that drive, I said carefully. Will you trust me that long? Confusion flickered across his face. You're not firing me? Calling the police? Neither, at least not yet. First, I'm going to see if there's another solution. One that doesn't force you to choose between your daughter and your integrity. Hope and suspicion warred in his expression. Why would you help me after what I almost did? Because that's the company we're building. One that stands by its people when they face impossible choices. I stood up. Go back to work. Act normally. I'll be in touch before the end of the day. As Tyler left the conference room, I immediately called Martha. I need you to set up an emergency meeting with the medical benefits team, our legal counsel, the Vertex Foundation Board, and Patricia Wilson. Also, get me everything you can find on Emma Bennett's medical condition and the experimental treatment she needs. That's a lot of people on short notice, Martha noted. Want to tell me what's going on? We're going to save a life and protect our technology, not necessarily in that order. The next 6 hours were a whirlwind of meetings, calls, and strategizing. By 8 p.m., I had a plan and the board's approval to implement it. I texted Tyler to meet me at the Parker Building, in the rooftop garden where I often went to think. He arrived looking haggard but determined. Have you made your decision? Instead of answering directly, I handed him a folder. This is a new program we're launching. The Vertex Family Medical Crisis Fund. It provides up to $2 million in medical assistance for employees facing catastrophic health situations not covered by our regular insurance. Tyler stared at the document, confusion evident. This doesn't exist. I went through all the company's assistance programs. It does as of 2 hours ago. The board approved it unanimously, and the first recipient will be Emma Bennett. Tyler's hands trembled as he flipped through the pages. This covers everything: the treatment, travel expenses, follow-up care. But why? Why create an entire program just for us? Not just for you, for any Vertex employee who might face a similar crisis in the future. I moved to the edge of the roof garden, looking out at the city lights. When I took over as CEO, I promised to build a company where people wouldn't have to make the kind of choice you were facing. Today showed me we still had work to do. Tyler struggled to find words, emotion overwhelming him. I don't understand. I betrayed your trust. I was ready to compromise our most valuable intellectual property. No, I corrected gently. You were a father facing an unbearable choice, and you reached out for help in the only way you felt was available. The failure wasn't yours. It was ours for not having systems in place that could properly support you. What about the drive? The code I downloaded? I trust you'll return it. And then I'd like you to work with our security team to strengthen our protocols. No one knows the system better than the person who found its vulnerabilities. For a moment, Tyler said nothing, overwhelmed by the unexpected turn of events. Then, Jason Wells, He'll be expecting me tonight with the data. He knows about Emma's condition. I smiled grimly. Jason Wells is no longer your concern, but I would be very interested in the details of your arrangement with him. The next morning, I convened an emergency meeting with our legal team and senior executives. The information Tyler had provided confirmed what we had suspected. Jason Wells, still bitter about his departure from Vertex, had been systematically approaching our employees with personal crises, offering financial help in exchange for company secrets. Tyler wasn't the first he had targeted, but he was the first with access to truly valuable intellectual property. We have two options, our legal counsel explained. We can pursue criminal charges based on corporate espionage and attempted intellectual property theft. Or we can handle this more discreetly. What's the discreet option? I asked, though I already had my own ideas. A cease and desist with evidence of his activities sent to his current employers and investors. It would effectively end his career in the industry without the public spectacle of a criminal case. I considered this, then shook my head. Neither approach addresses the root of the problem. Jason targets vulnerable employees because he knows their desperate situations make them potential security risks. The real solution is to ensure no Vertex employee ever feels that desperate again. Over the next several weeks, we implemented a comprehensive overhaul of our employee support systems. The Family Medical Crisis Fund was just the beginning. We expanded mental health services, created emergency housing assistance, established a confidential financial hardship program, and improved child and elder care benefits. Each initiative was designed not just as an employee perk, but as a security measure, a recognition that our people were both our greatest asset and, potentially, our greatest vulnerability. As for Jason Wells, I opted for a third approach. I requested a private meeting with him at a neutral location, a reserved room at the Philadelphia Union League. He arrived looking smug, clearly believing he had leverage over us. "Daniel Parker," he greeted me with false warmth. "I wondered if you might get involved personally. Your employee seems to have missed our appointment last night." "Tyler Bennett is no longer available for your recruitment efforts," I replied calmly. "Neither are any other Vertex employees." Jason's smile didn't falter. "Bold statement. People have personal problems, Daniel. Financial needs. Sick family members. Sometimes they need solutions that go beyond corporate policy." "I'm aware. That's why we've implemented programs to address those needs directly. But that's not why I asked you here." I slid a folder across the table. Inside was evidence of every approach Jason had made to our employees, every offer of financial assistance in exchange for company information, meticulously documented with dates, times, and in some cases, recordings. This is the file we're prepared to send to federal prosecutors, the SEC, and every major tech company and investment firm in the country, I explained as he paged through it, his complexion growing paler. "But we're also prepared to keep it in a drawer, on one condition." "Which is?" he asked, his voice noticeably less confident. "You provide us with detailed information about every piece of Vertex intellectual property or confidential information you've acquired through these methods, and the names of any other employees you've approached who we may not be aware of. And if I refuse, then by this time tomorrow, you'll be facing federal charges and will never work in this industry again." I stood to leave. "You have until 5 p.m. to decide. My legal team will be waiting for your call." Jason capitulated, as I knew he would. The damage was contained, and more importantly, we learned valuable lessons about our vulnerabilities. The incident with Tyler became a catalyst for cultural transformation that enhanced both our security and our humanity as a company. 6 months later, I stood in a hospital room, watching as Emma Bennett, now in remission thanks to the experimental treatment, showed me her science project, a simplified model of neural interfaces inspired by her father's work. "Dad says you're the reason I got better," the 11-year-old said matter-of-factly as she adjusted a wire in her model. Your dad is the reason you got better, I corrected gently. He loves you very much. But you helped when he was scared, she persisted with the directness only children can manage. That's what Dad said, that everyone gets scared sometimes, even grown-ups, and the important thing is having people who help when you're scared, from the wisdom of children. Your dad is a very smart man. Tyler, who had been speaking with the doctor in the hallway, rejoined us. The final tests came back clear, he announced, his face radiating relief and joy. We're officially done with treatments. As Emma hugged her father, I felt a deep satisfaction that transcended business metrics and stock prices. This was the true measure of success, not just building innovative technology, but creating a community where people could thrive even through their darkest challenges. When I returned to the office that evening, I found Martha waiting with a key. Curious smile. You missed an interesting call, she said. Richard Manning wants to meet? I raised an eyebrow. Richard? What for? He didn't say anything specifically, but rumor has it Nexus Technologies is struggling. Their last 2 product launches underperformed, and their biggest investor is reportedly looking to pull out. And now Richard wants to talk, I mused. Timing is everything. Are you going to meet with him? Martha asked. I considered the question. 2 years ago, when the wound of betrayal was still fresh, I might have relished the opportunity to face Richard from a position of strength. Now, it seemed almost irrelevant, a distraction from the meaningful work we were doing. Schedule it for next week, I decided, but keep it brief, 30 minutes, no more. You're not curious what he wants? I can guess. Either he's looking for a job, seeking investment, or hoping to sell what's left of Nexus before it collapses. Entirely, I shrugged. None of those options particularly interest me, but professional courtesy dictates I at least hear him out. The meeting with Richard proved illuminating, though not in the way either of us might have expected. He arrived at my office precisely on time, dressed in an expensive suit that couldn't quite disguise the strain evident in his face. Daniel, he greeted me with forced casualness. Thank you for making time. The place looks different than I remember. We've made some changes, I acknowledged, gesturing toward the chair across from my desk. The executive floor that had once been Richard's private domain was now an open, collaborative space. My own office, while private, featured glass walls and a deliberately accessible layout. Clearly. He sat, glancing around with barely concealed discomfort. You've done well for yourself. Vertex's market position is stronger than ever. We've been fortunate, I replied neutrally. But I suspect you didn't request this meeting to discuss Vertex's performance. Richard's carefully constructed facade faltered slightly. Always direct. Some things don't change. He cleared his throat. The fact is, Nexus has encountered some temporary challenges. Market conditions primarily. The timing of our product cycle has proven less than optimal. I waited, saying nothing. Richard had always filled silences with words, revealing more than he intended. The point is, he continued, increasingly uncomfortable with my silence. There could be strategic advantages to a partnership between our companies. Complementary technologies, shared resources, that sort of thing. A partnership, I repeated. More of an acquisition, if we're being precise. Nexus has valuable IP that could integrate well with Vertex's portfolio, particularly in the spatial computing arena. And there it was, the real purpose of his visit. Nexus was failing, and Richard was looking for a safe landing, one that would allow him to save face and salvage some value from his failed venture. I appreciate your directness, I said carefully, but I'm not sure what Nexus offers that would justify an acquisition. Our own spatial computing platform is launching next month, and our development pipeline is robust. Richard's expression hardened slightly. I've seen the previews of NeuroSync. Impressive, certainly, but there are aspects of our technology that could enhance your implementation considerably. I'd be willing to demonstrate— Richard, I interrupted gently, let's be honest with each other. Nexus is in trouble. You've approached me because you need an exit strategy, not because you believe in synergies between our companies." For a moment, he looked like he might argue, but then his shoulders slumped almost imperceptibly. "The landscape has changed," he admitted. "Investors are more demanding, clients less patient. The methods that worked before don't work anymore," I finished for him. "Because the industry has evolved beyond showmanship and toward substance, beyond personality-driven leadership and toward collaborative innovation." Richard's jaw tightened. "Is this the part where you lecture me on all the ways I failed? Where you gloat about ending up with my company, my position, my legacy?" "No," I said simply. "This is the part where I decline your acquisition proposal and wish you well in your future endeavors." He stared at me, clearly expecting more. Perhaps the verbal evisceration he himself might have delivered in my position. When it didn't come, confusion crossed his face. "That's it? After everything that happened between us?" I smiled slightly. "Richard, I couldn't have built what we have at Vertex today without the lessons I learned from our shared history, both positive and negative. In a strange way, I owe you a debt of gratitude." "Gratitude," he echoed, disbelieving. "For firing me, for forcing me to find a new path. Sometimes the worst moments in our lives become the catalysts for our greatest transformations." As Richard left my office, visibly unsettled by the unexpected turn our conversation had taken, I felt no triumph or vindication, only a calm certainty that the journey that had begun with betrayal had led exactly where it needed to go. Not to revenge, but to growth. Not to retribution, but to reinvention. Not to the past, but to a future built on stronger foundations. The building I owned had been just the beginning. The real story was what we had all built together since. 5 years to the day after Richard Manning fired me from Vertex Technologies, I stood on the stage of the Philadelphia Convention Center, addressing the graduating class of my alma mater as their commencement speaker. The journey from that humiliating walk out of the building with a cardboard box to this moment of recognition had been extraordinary by any measure. The most valuable lesson I've learned in business isn't about strategy or technology or market positioning, I told the sea of eager faces before me. It's that true success is built on how you respond to failure. Not just your own failures, but the failures of others toward you. Vertex had grown beyond even my ambitious projections. NeuroSync had revolutionized software development workflows across the industry. Our corporate campus now occupied 3 buildings in downtown Philadelphia, including the original Parker building where it all began. Most importantly, we had maintained the culture of integrity and support that had emerged from those early crises. In the front row sat the people who had been instrumental in this transformation: Liam, whose strategic vision had helped guide our expansion; Martha, whose financial acumen had kept us stable through rapid growth; Emily, whose marketing brilliance had made Vertex a household name in the tech world; and Megan, whose technical innovation continued to push the boundaries of what was possible. Also present was Tyler Bennett, now our chief security officer, with his daughter Emma beside him. At 16, she was cancer-free and already showing signs of following her father into technology, having won the state science fair with an accessibility interface for neural computing. When I was fired after a decade of loyalty, I could have chosen vengeance as my primary motivation, I continued, looking out at the graduates. That path was certainly available to me. I owned the building, after all. A ripple of laughter spread through the audience at the now familiar story, which had become something of a legend in business circles. But vengeance is a poor foundation for anything lasting. Instead, I chose to build something new, something founded on the belief that how we treat people matters more than quarterly results or stock prices. As I spoke, I noticed a familiar figure slipping into the back of the auditorium. Richard Manning looked different now, the polished corporate appearance replaced by a more casual, almost humble demeanor. After Nexus Technologies folded, he had taken a teaching position at a business school in Boston, focusing on entrepreneurial ethics. Our paths had crossed occasionally at industry events, the initial awkwardness gradually giving way to a cautious professional respect. "The greatest revenge isn't destroying what hurt you," I said, making brief eye contact with Richard across the distance. "It's creating something so much better that the past becomes merely a stepping stone on your journey." After the ceremony, as I mingled with faculty and graduates, Richard approached me. The years had softened the sharp edges between us, though we would never be friends in the traditional sense. "Inspiring speech," he said, extending his hand. "Your students are fortunate to have your perspective." "They're not my students," I corrected gently. "Just young people starting their own journeys. Like we were once." Richard nodded thoughtfully. "I read about the Vertex Foundation's new initiative, funding medical research for rare childhood diseases. That wouldn't happen to be inspired by one of your employees, would it?" "Everything we build is inspired by the people around us," replied. "For better or worse." He acknowledged this with a slight nod. "I've been requiring my students to study the Vertex case, the before and after, the transformation. And what lessons do they take from it? That culture isn't just an HR buzzword, it's the foundation everything else is built on." Richard's expression turned reflective. "That leadership isn't about control, but empowerment. Lessons I learned too late." Before I could respond, Liam approached Emma Bennett, eager to share news about her college acceptances. Richard excused himself with a small nod that contained volumes of unspoken history. Later that evening, our extended Vertex family gathered at my home to celebrate not just the commencement address, but 5 years of remarkable growth. As conversations flowed around me, Martha joined me on the balcony overlooking the city. "Penny for your thoughts," she said, handing me a glass of wine. "Just reflecting on the journey. 5 years ago, standing in the same spot after being fired, I never imagined we'd end up here." Martha smiled. "No? Even then, I saw something in you that Richard never did. The ability to transform setbacks into opportunities." "It wasn't just me," I reminded her. "It was all of us, building something together." "Speaking of building," Martha said, turning to face the city lights, "the board approved your proposal for the new innovation campus. Construction begins next month. The Vertex Innovation Campus would be our most ambitious project yet, a space designed not just for our own research, but as an incubator for promising startups and a center for technology education in underserved communities. Tyler asked if we would consider naming the main research building after Emma," Martha added. "The team loves the idea." I nodded, oddly moved by the suggestion. "The Emma Bennett Center for Collaborative Innovation. It has a nice ring to it." As the evening wound down and guests departed, I found myself alone in my study, looking at a framed photograph taken on the first day of Launchpad Partners. Liam, Martha, Emily, and me, standing in the newly renovated office with expressions of determined hope. Beside it stood a simple glass display containing a worn visitor badge, the one I'd been given when I returned to Vertex for that pivotal meeting after being fired. Kept it as a reminder not of humiliation, but of transformation. My phone chimed with a message from Megan. "The prototype passed final testing. We're ready for Phase 2. Phase 2 of our newest initiative, technology that would make advanced computing interfaces accessible to people with severe physical disabilities. The project that Emma had inspired with her childhood science fair project." I replied with a simple, "Congratulations to the team," then set my phone aside and gazed out at the city, at the buildings and streets and lights, but more importantly, at the human network of connections and possibilities they represented. The building I owned had been just the first chapter in a much larger story. What mattered wasn't the physical structures, but what we chose to build within them, the cultures, the relationships, the innovations that could transform lives. It had begun with betrayal, continued through resilience, and blossomed into creation. A journey that taught me the most valuable lesson of all. Sometimes losing what you thought you wanted opens the door to building what you were meant to create all along. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.